scheduled for Wednesday, September 25th. Now being 4 o'clock, I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with roll call. Please indicate if you're present. Mark Nelson.
Here.
Steve Corey. Here. Dave Neal.
Here.
Megan Larson.
Here.
Scott Walters.
Here.
And next, we'll go with ex officio members. Councilwoman Genesis Malam.
Here.
And Rochelle Klein. I see Conrad's here. I'll direct questions to him if we need anything. Quorum being present, we'll move on to considering the agenda. Draft agenda is before you. Are there any comments?
Bill, how about you? Good.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved as written. Further comments? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote, all those in favor of approving the agenda as written signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. Thank you. Next, we will go ahead and consider the draft minutes from the August 28th meeting. Are there comments on the draft?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes of the August 28th meeting as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the draft minutes for the August 28th meeting be approved as written. Further comments? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote, all those in favor of approving the minutes as written signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Thank you. The minutes are passed as written. I have no items under community acknowledgement at this point, so we'll go ahead and move to 6 program reports. We'll go to the solid waste report A by staff. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, this quarterly update was requested as a way to show the commission what staff is tracking and to gauge look and feel, quality of tracking, and what the commission believe are important matrices to track when it comes to solid waste in the city of Meridian. So this is our first attempt at going through the matrices that we believe are important, and after we will be looking for comment either during the meeting or after, whichever the commission feels is appropriate. So I will go ahead and get started. What we'll be going over today are just a number of topics. Residential trash tons collected by month. We'll be looking at the pounds per household and the way in which that's changing around. Households recycling to the total number of households with accounts. Our residential recycle pounds per household. Our subscription services, grass and glass. Our recycling cost to process, which has been something that's been discussed fairly recently. The situations where it may be that there are some educational opportunities for residents of the city in tags that Republic is issuing to customers for service issues. The environmental impacts of trucks on the road with some specifics to carbon dioxide produced, and then service commitments or residential misses per 10,000 households. The first graph you're seeing in front of you is our residential trash tons per month. It does have a slight upward trend, but you'll notice how extreme the actual number of accounts is trending upward. So to staff, that's a relatively good sign that perhaps people are getting more of a reduced feeling to how they're dealing with their trash and what they're doing with their waste. As you can see, it's a much more extreme upward trend for number of households as opposed to number of trash tons per month. Our next slide is the residential trash pounds collected per household. The number of pounds per household should be a pretty similar pretty similar line to the number of tons per month, since it's just those tons divided by the households. But again, you'll see that our household rates are going up, and our trend line for our actual pounds per household is going up, but at a much lower degree. Our total households to recycling households, we are currently at 90% of residents recycling in the city of Meridian. Staff consider that to be a very great thing. You'll notice if you look at the graph, you'll see the line is trending upward at a slightly faster rate for total households recycling. So at some point, in theory, those lines will meet up at 100% of households recycling. At least that's the hope. Our pounds of recycle set out by number of households, that line has a little bit more of an extreme and slight downward trend. And staff think that that is probably due to the kind of extreme changes that have happened recently in recycle markets. There are less things that we can recycle. Citizens tend to have a little bit more of a confusion about what material is recyclable. So you'll note that line is trending downward just a little bit. Now, mind you, again, this is only a 12-month time period. So over a longer period, we may see a more extreme downward trend. Our subscription glass collection is very level with the number of accounts. You'll notice a slight increase from September of 2018 through August of 2019. You may notice that December through March, there are no setouts. That is because the grass program does not run it. The residents can use their grass cart as an extra trash cart during that period of time. And you'll see that that graph follows pretty closely a good seasonality trend. There's a bit of a jump in August, which is a little bit counter to what Republic Services normally sees in grass in August. So that's a bit of an interesting one, but normally you'd see that tail down as August is a little bit of a warmer month and the grass grows just a little bit slower. On our glass collection, our other subscription service, you'll notice there's a little bit of a downward trend in the number of accounts. But if you look at our actual setouts line, you'll see that that's actually trending up in the last couple months. And staff and Republic tend to agree that that could be from people having one cart for several different households, because people may have issue filling up one cart at their house and they want to kind of split that cost, and people still want to recycle glass. And they may not necessarily want to use the glass drop site, but they find it more economical to have one or two households sharing a cart to fill it up for the once every 4 week schedule. Our recycle cost to process, as everyone knows, that's kind of an up and down line as recycle markets continue to adjust to the changes that have happened throughout the world. There are times when this graph actually, if you reference the first graph, you'll see that there are times when less material is getting collected. So obviously the cost to process goes down with the graph, but it kind of goes back and forth depending on what is the market doing and how much material has to get processed. On this graph, you'll see these are the educational opportunities, I think I'll call them, where Republic has issued educational information in the form of a trash tag to residents. They're kind of all over the place as well, depending on month. You'll see the biggest one is people setting out their carts either late or not having them out at all and then calling for a return. This one, that particular issue has been something that I believe has been a little bit of a difficulty for Republic in the past, and is something that we have pushed on an educational front in the past as well. On the recycle side, you'll see that it's a much more extreme late not out variance between all the other issues that could befall a recycle customer with their cart either being blocked or having extras. And my guess would be that is just due to the fact that recycle is every other week, so occasionally people may forget when their recycle week is and then would still like their recycle collected later on, so they see the truck go by, put their cart out, and continue on their way. Now, the environmental impact that you'll see in front of you, this one staff found particularly important because the blue bar chart actually represents the number of CNG equivalent gallons used, and the green and yellow line actually represents the tons of CO2 released by CNG trucks. So you'll see significantly more gallons that are actually used by Republic's trucks in the city of Meridian at significantly lower CO2 impact. You'll also note that that red bar line is the regular diesel gallons used, and you'll note that that is trending downward. It seems that as the number of CNG gallons go up, the number of diesel trucks that are getting used in the city are actually going down. So the lines are trending in opposite directions, but staff feels that it's a very good sign when the number of CNG gallons continue to go up and the diesel gallons continue to go down. The final chart that you'll be looking at today is our misses per 10,000 for both trash and recycle customers. This is In the opinion of staff, this is this graph shows that we have a very reliable service provider. There was an uptick in June, and that was due to some staffing issues, we could say. And then Republic, as you all may know, actually flew in drivers from out of state to assist in getting the material picked up off the ground. So we saw that downturn in July, and then it slightly ticked back up in August, but even at the worst time, there is a 99.73% chance that your trash will be serviced on time on the right day. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Members of the commission, are there any questions for staff on the material that's been presented?
Mr. Chair, I have a couple. Tom, on the household or tons per household graph, so it shows like an uptick in May, and it goes up significantly. I'm guessing that's because you can do that set out of all your stuff. The Trash or Treasure weekend, right, is in May. So I think it would be interesting to compare that to May the prior year rather than April or June, because it's not gonna, right? And that's throwing your trend line off because you have this kind of, yeah. So I think tons per household, I think, is a great statistic to keep, but it would be valuable to compare it to the same month in the prior year. And then like February goes way down because it's a short month. I don't know why that would be, but it'd be interesting to compare to February the prior year rather than month by month, because.
Oh, definitely. I can definitely do, if it's, excuse me, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Larson, I can definitely do year over year comparisons if that's something you'd like to see in the future.
I think for that particular statistic, because it kind of controls for population, and just seeing how much trash is each household producing and comparing by month, same month in the prior year would be informative, I think. I have another one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe this is a Rochelle question. So on the tags for items that shouldn't be in the trash or misses, does multifamily come into that at all, or that's just single family houses? Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Just a comment that, thanks for doing that. That's a lot easier for me to consume. I appreciate it.
Very happy to do it.
Members of the commission, further comments? Thank you, Tom. We move on to section 7, action items. A, old business. And the first item under there is an update on the survey. Tom?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, just wanted to go over some quick highlights of the survey. I hope you were all able to read it. I sent it out essentially as soon as staff got it finalized from the third party. Just some quick things I want to let you know. The consultant will be able to come and explain. He's actually scheduled to present to council on the October 22nd meeting, and he could appear to the commission if that was so desired by the commission.
Members of the commission, would you like the consultant to go ahead and present on the results of the survey at the next meeting?
I don't know what council's availability is to just attend the council meeting if they wish to see that presentation,
That's certainly,
rather than ask them to come to 2.
yeah, that's certainly, there's no problem with that at all. I mean, I guess the one thing I would say is if you've got questions, obviously you won't have an opportunity to maybe directly ask questions, though I suspect that maybe there'd be an opportunity after the meeting was over or after the presentation was over. So I think it would still work out completely to go ahead and do that, and we won't worry about having them stay over the extra day.
Unless,
No, I agree. I think that's a great suggestion.
Mr. Chair,
Tom?
just so the commission is aware, there is no additional cost for him to present the following day to the commission if that was a concern of any of the commissioners.
Seeing the heads seeming to be still in agreement that we'll go ahead and attend the council meeting if people are interested in hearing the presentation and are available, and that'll be good enough for us. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. To continue with the update, Mr. Chair, the survey was mailed to approximately 3,500 households. There were 532 respondents. The survey company stated that that gave them a 95% confidence interval, plus or minus 4.25%, based on the confidence interval. That was a good way for me to stumble over my words. Some high-level takeaways that staff got from the initial results of the survey. The number one seemed to be that the transfer station, the Meridian transfer station, is a majority of the respondents found that highly valuable and used it to a relatively large degree. So it seemed as though, people really like the transfer station. At least the survey indicated that people really like the transfer station and find it very valuable to the community. A majority of respondents also had high support for our continuing the glass program. Not really any which way to do it, but they seemed a majority of respondents it seemed to favor the glass program. Another fairly telling one was that a majority of survey respondents also think that the city government should take a lead or supporting role in informing residents and businesses about additional existing programs and services, the development of comprehensive waste reduction and recycle programs, the development of progressive programs to expand waste reduction and recycling in the community, and to educate residents about the importance of waste reduction and recycling. And the last major takeaway that staff found was that a majority of respondents continue to have a high support of recycling in the city.
Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments of staff's summary of the results from the survey? Rochelle.
Mr. Chairman, Tom, did you have any questions? I can't remember about green waste or composting or along those lines, or did this just deal with existing programs?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Member Klein, there were a few questions directly related to composting, and just a few that were directly related to composting.
Any particular results with those, or just?
Mr. Chair, Member Klein, I don't have those off the top of my head, but I could definitely get those for you shortly.
Further questions or comments? I think we look forward to that report next month. Next is item 7A2, a update on the CPI and rate adjustment effort for 2019. I think probably the key points are that to catch up, the Republic Services went ahead and presented the request for rate adjustments 3 or 4 weeks ago, and there was a public hearing held. No members of the public went ahead and commented on the proposed increase, and so last week, on the 17th, council took up the rate adjustment request and passed it. So, Tom, is there anything else you want to highlight in that activity?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the only thing would be the resolution was actually on the consent agenda yesterday, and it was approved by council.
Okay. So with members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments on that report? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to new business. Under new business, item B1 is a item from the Meridian Youth Advisory Council, and they're an item on recycling signage. Come on forward. And if you could state your name into the microphone for our record.
Corsi from Mayor's Youth Advisory Council, and I'm the chair.
Thank you so much for coming here, and welcome. And it's all yours now to go ahead and talk to us about your proposal.
So with the city, we've been working on our participatory budgeting for the year of 2019. We're installing 12 recycling receptacles in Meridian's core and wrapping them with youth-made art. And one of our points of contention is signage, and we are hoping to make signage out of metal with like a laser cutter. However, we do not have funding within our budget for that, and so we came here to request and speak on what should be included. From other consultations, we've already decided that the signage should include aluminum, paper, and cardboard, since those are the easiest at the moment to decipher as a recycler. And so we just wanted to speak about that signage and any advice or support that you could provide for us.
Thank you. We do appreciate you coming over here and updating us on MIAC's activities. Do you have any idea of what the cost for the signage is going to be?
We don't quite have a ballpark yet. We're in discussion with ACHD. We contacted the Transportation Operations Superintendent, and he said that they have a laser cutter that they're able to use, and they can do the installation for free. But regarding the use of their machine, they weren't able to give us a ballpark on that yet.
Okay. And do you have some kind of a timetable you're kind of hoping to go ahead and do this project?
So the receptacles will be installed on October 7th, and at the moment we'll just be putting like temporary signage, if like stickers at the least, but we were hoping for something that could be more obvious and visible to the users. So technically there's not really a timeline, but as soon as possible would obviously be the most beneficial for the use.
Okay. Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments at this time on the presentation?
Mr. Chair,
Councilwoman Malam?
so I'm a little bit confused because I thought what you were going to be talking about was, and maybe you've already done this and I just can't remember because it seems like this has been going on for a really long time. What specifically is going to be in those?
So we had a specific meeting with Tom actually last month, and we decided that the 3 items that should be listed on there were going to be aluminum, cardboard, and paper, because again, those are the most easy to navigate, and any plastics cause a lot of confusion, so we are trying to reduce contamination.
And if I may, I believe you well, I should say, let me word this a little bit differently. Rochelle, I believe you're versed on this subject and that Republic is supportive of the activity?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for coming today. And yes, my only request would be that when these are installed, that you notify us so that we can make sure that they get routed. So that's one of the most important things, so we know when to collect them and their location. So we'll geo-pin them in the city, and then we'll make sure they get routed. So as soon as they're installed, we'll be ready to go.
Yes, that will
Thank
be
you.
happening.
And we're very supportive. This is a great project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, can you remind me, we don't necessarily have to go ahead and open a window for public requests for funding from the Community Recycling Fund. We've got the opportunity to go ahead and do commission-sponsored projects. So if we were interested in do this, we could go ahead and do that without actually opening a window. Am I?
Mr. Chairman, I believe you're right. Yeah, I don't think you're required for the commission to initiate a project, so I think you're okay going forward.
Okay. So back to the commission. Do you have further questions at this point?
So I guess for me, are you asking for some input on the signage at all, or just trying to see if we could help pay for some of that?
So it's kind of both in that regard, because the only people that we've been able to talk about actually providing the signage would be ACHD. So any advice with what obviously your expertise may bring, or if you're used to partnering with a certain printmaker, that kind of information and connections, along with possible financial help depending on cost, is all that we're asking for.
All right, well, thank you. It sounds reasonable that we support it. And I think I remember some conversation about it was too complicated to try to, at the parks, to keep that from being contaminated, right? So we kind of picked those top 3 materials.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nelson, there was definitely, previously discussed had been about some of the confusion and high levels of contamination that were coming from the parks. And staff had initially asked Republic to start to track the amount of contamination that they were getting. So at the commission's pleasure, we could ask them for that information as needed.
I don't know if we need it, or this is just kind of how we kind of derived that these were kind of the top 3 that we thought was worth.
Dave, you're welcome up here to go ahead and.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. Sorry for that. I think a couple of things are going on here. A few months ago, with the recycling in the parks conversation, there was a decision by the board, by the commission, to continue recycling in the parks and have Republic keep track of that information and give us a report back on exactly what the contamination was looking like, to further that conversation around what does recycling in the parks look like. In tandem, this issue came up from MIAC about their efforts that they're putting the bins on the street. And I think their key component is the wrappings and the information that goes along as to what is exactly recyclable. And I think I think dealing with both issues is appropriate, and to have a consistent message is probably appropriate. Additionally, maybe understanding what the costs are in an application for you guys so that you can act on something would be helpful. And then additionally, whether or not you want to have input on what is recyclable. We understand sort of anecdotally what the parks were challenged with. We were waiting for that data. We haven't received that yet. And then do you want to switch that up regardless of what happens at the parks with what goes on at the MIAC bins? Do you want to have a potential for having different material in different bins? Maybe that causes confusion, maybe it doesn't. So that's my recollection of the parks discussion around what was being recycled at the parks and how this may dovetail with that. So I don't know if that gives you any more information that you
We
want.
just happen to have 2 independent initiatives that just happen to coincide at the right time.
Correct, Commissioner Nelson. The timing is just 2 projects occurring at the same time. Not knowing what's happening at the parks yet and getting a report back on what's the contamination looks like, and do you want to limit that information to certain material streams, or do you want to have a different type of approach to allow all the current recyclables that happen at the households and the commercial level to happen at the parks as well? And so I don't think we've had that conversation yet.
I would go ahead and point out our community recycling fund has a procedure that's set onto it that includes an application that goes ahead and identifies so that we know how much is being requested for subsidy. There is discussion in there about some signage to go ahead and identify that funding for the project came from the Community Recycling Fund. Our requesters have arranged for the signage. I think about the only thing we could go ahead and offer is Parks probably has the most experience in going ahead and accomplishing that signage, and they might have some suggestions, but I don't think there's anything wrong with use of Ada County Highway District. And so I'm afraid we're going to probably have to have you start working with staff here to go ahead and pull together an application for specifics. But before we get down to that point, again, commissioners, is there any questions that you have on this at this point?
So you want to have laser cut metal signs, is that correct?
Yes.
What if we decide in the future the content's gonna change, which more valuable commodity of recycling?
So we talked about that and how possible layering on the signage could be easier than, because one of our other options was to make it part of the vinyl wrapping with the art, so then it would be on the bin sides itself, but then that's harder to cover up, so we thought the additional signage would be easier to replace without compromising the bins, or even cover up if you needed to with a new sign.
Can you describe one of these bins for me?
So it's just a generic recycling bin, and it has a metal outside, and then we gave it to Art Sign Design, which is what's used for our electrical boxes. And so they're just wrapping the cylinder tube with this student-made art. So we are going to add a part of it that would have the list of things to recycle, but due to the fact that it changes so often, we thought that would be more difficult to change over time.
So is this sign separate from the bin? Is
It
that
would
the
be
idea?
on the bin, but it wouldn't be like engraved in the bin like the art would.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I guess I have a similar type question. The advantage of a metal sign attached to the bin or something as opposed to a sticker on top. I like, and I'm queuing off David's word of consistency, right? So if you can recycle different things at these bins versus the parks, I mean, it would make sense, I think, to have them all the same, whatever it is that's decided to do, and if you can just put a new sticker on. Are we worried the sticker's gonna come off in the weather, or people are gonna peel it off, or like what's the advantage of the metal sign?
So essentially it was like readability and accessibility, because we know that like if you go around a lot of recycling bins, maybe not in Meridian, but like people put stickers everywhere, whether they're supposed to or not. So we thought it would almost look like something that's not necessarily supposed to be there, and it wouldn't attract the attention so that they could see what they're actually supposed to be reading.
Additional questions or comments at this point?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. As a council, I think we should support funding, especially something that came through the youth council. It's right in line with what we do, and it seems that we should keep our message consistent between all the recycling options if we could. I think we even discussed making sure that if we had a recycling that was restricted, we also had closely accessible trash so that people don't use it as recyclable as trash anyway. That's probably what some of that data we were looking for was supposed to help us learn. I think for the council, I think we're in line with the idea, but probably work with our staff and get that data that is being collected and make sure we're doing the right thing. I think you mentioned that probably a logo for MIAC and for SWAC or something. Is that what you were?
Well, what I was reminding was that the procedures do identify
Branding.
the funding source signage, but I certainly would encourage that too, to go ahead and identify that MIAC is did the idea work on this and a lot of the legwork too, so you should definitely take credit for it.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, question if I may. So generally, it sounds like there's support for the concept. It's just needing more detail. When it comes to the policy of what gets placed in the recycling bins and whether or not it's different materials for one entity, a park, versus these bins, do you prefer to have input on that, and can we look to you for that guidance? And then additionally, timing-wise, for MIAC maybe, understanding that their goal is October 7th, the next commission meeting is October 24th-ish sometime, the fourth week. How that might impact MIAC's efforts and whether or not that delay can happen, or do the cans get put out before there's a label, which seems a little counterintuitive if they're truly just recycling bins that are going to sit there and do nothing, so to speak. So just trying to work with you all to understand how much input you want to have and how consistent we want to be, and also respect MIAC's timeline and how much deference you want to give to that.
I think one of the things we do have to go ahead and say is, of course, what we need is a specific request. So I'm afraid we're going to have to go ahead and wait for the specific request to kind of come up for us to be able to do an action. Having said that, there's certainly no reason why anyone who might have some suggestions should feel free to go ahead and express those recommendations at this point, and that way the commission can confirm that there's agreement with those suggestions, or if not, I think we could certainly wait for the specific request too.
Sure. Staff can work with MIAC and have an application package and information put together. Would it be helpful to have, and is it possible to have from Republic a report on the parks, the summer months recycling that we had discussed a few months ago, so that you can have some data? And number one, is it possible to have that? And
Yep, Mr. Chairman and David, yes, we can pull that. I think that was supposed to run through September 30th, but we can pull that now. So we can just send that over electronically, even just to the whole group, tomorrow or the next day.
Sure.
So that's easy enough. And then you can see, my recommendation would be consistency, like what's collected in the parks is collected on the street. Just, and public recycling is just simple is better. So it's the old Occam's razor, right? So if you get simple, like it's saying aluminum, cardboard, and paper, it's pretty simple. And that gets the plastic out of the parks and the sidewalks. That would just be my recommendation from doing this for a while.
then we can likely add that to the agenda in advance of this discussion at the next meeting, give you further information.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to say, for continuity and consistency, to have the signage the same
On both.
throughout the city. This is a great idea. Let's see if we can't make it work and then put it on all the recycling bins eventually.
Members of the commission, further comments or suggestions?
Some clarification, Mr. Chair, so that my target date is October 7th to put the cans out.
So yes, we have the cans being wrapped right now, and we're installing them with Parks and Rec on October 7th. Right now, they're identifiable as recycling bins because our student-made art was actually our own project, and so we made sure the requirements were that it had some recycling emblem on it. So it's identifiably a recycling bin. It's just the specifics of what goes into it is what the signage is for. So we are putting it by trash cans to try to make that distinction, but ultimately, you guys are the experts in regards to that signage. So that we would like to get on as soon as possible, but the receptacles are fully functioning as of now. They just might breed a lot of contamination.
So, but there'd be an opportunity to attach the sign to
Right.
the receptacles later, should SWAC choose to fund it. And the receptacles themselves were funded by the MIAC proprietary.
Yeah, we made a participatory budgeting request, and then City Council gave us those funds.
Thanks.
Further comments or questions? Thank you for coming up. We definitely look forward to the request when you put it together. And thank you, staff, for helping her. And with that, we move on to 7B new business, item 2, Republic Services Recycling Area Update. I believe that Republic Services has just had a wealth of desire over there, and as a result of that is very active at this point. So Rochelle, can you go ahead and catch us up on what's going on over there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and also I just want to make sure I sent off that request for data, so hopefully that's what I was doing. So I'll get the parks data hopefully by tomorrow morning. Yes, so we are in the process, if you've driven by our facility recently, it's under construction. We have historically had a big dirt lot on the corner of Franklin and Ward that was undeveloped, and so we went through the permitting process with the city, and we got a permit to develop, and we started moving forward with that, and someone from the local irrigation district drove past and said that our permit did not include an easement, so that project was frozen while we had to secure an easement with the irrigation district, which we think now all the attorneys will work through all the pieces that need to be worked through by this Friday, and then we'll be back in motion again. So I think that's going pretty quickly, but we didn't have that as part of we didn't know that was part of our packet, so we just went ahead with landscaping and things like that. So now we had a little bit of a setback, but we had initially thought, because recycling is so popular, we were going to, as people come into the transfer station, we were going to have the recycling center off to the left, and then have people throwing waste away go directly ahead and onto the tipping floor. For whatever reason, recently being this summer, we've had a significant contamination issue with people in the cardboard area in particular, people are, I don't know if they're hurried or they just don't want to take the time to get rid of what's inside the boxes, but they're shoving boxes in that have packing peanuts and plastic film and styrofoam kind of packaging around the boxes. And so it's become very clear to us that we cannot leave that unattended. So we are spending a fair amount of time at Western top grading that cardboard and pulling out the trash to make sure it's accepted. So now we're evaluating two different options, and the second one being moving the recycling center over to the gravel area. So you'd still have to drive past the scale house, what's going to be the scale house in the next few months, and toward the tipping floor, but we would direct the traffic into the gravel area. So that way the spotter can see what they can spot for the trash and they can spot for the recycling also, to make sure that we can reduce contamination as people drop their materials off. So it has not historically been an issue, but just this summer it's been a big issue with people not breaking down their boxes and leaving packing material inside of them. So we may pivot, but the important thing is we have a significant amount of extra space. There's a vinyl privacy fence around the entire that entire portion now, and so it'll be screened from the street. It'll also serve as like a defender fence for litter, which will help also, and it'll keep people from abandoning trailers or parking trailers there as well. We had 2 more campers abandoned at the site this weekend, so people left them. These people that forgot to take their plates off, so code enforcement was pretty quick in tracking them down, but they're still there for now. We have to figure out a way to get them to the landfill, I guess. So I think it'll also decrease abandoned trailers and vehicles on that property. So that's huge for us also. So, but we expect once we're back in motion to have something done by maybe late October and open. We will be leaving a break in that fencing. There's a purposeful break in the fencing because we hope to resume the project of tapping into the Meridian Purple Pipe program and by early spring, and using reclaimed water to wash all of our carts and our trucks and dumpsters, and for irrigation for that entire lot as well.
Thank you, Rochelle. That helped quite a bit, because I ended up with a few extra boxes a week ago, Monday, and went over to drop them off, and the hand-in-hand bin was moved, but I was directed over to a couple of bins to take cardboard, and was getting some odds and ends information. So I knew you were very active, but I didn't really know exactly what was occurring on all of that.
So, Mr. Chairman, as far as the hand-in-hand box, we're in the process of taking all the dividers out of that. Historically, it's been paper, cardboard, and then cans. And we are taking all the dividers out. It's going to be cardboard only. We're in the right now with the growth that we're seeing and all the move-in, move-outs. We're filling 3 to 4 30-yard containers a day with cardboard. And so now we've fabricated 2, I think they're 6-yard containers with lids that will be dedicated for cans only and mixed waste paper only. So we'll just keep the cardboard by itself in the hand-in-hand container. And we'll still get the revenue back from there's no revenue on mixed paper, but we'll get the revenue back from the cans and the cardboard from those containers. But we just are getting inundated with cardboard, so we're looking at now getting a baler, because we're getting between 90 and 100, over 90 and 120 yards a day of cardboard at that site. A lot.
Indeed, and so, as you said, you're kind of dedicating a great deal of space over there at your property for all these additional bins and such. Members of the commission, do you have any comments or questions on the material that's just been presented to the commission on what occurs in recycling over at the transfer station? I would go ahead and say, please keep us informed on what's going on over there. Obviously, the blip that there's some issues with contamination coming in, packing material coming in the cardboard and other things. Those are the kind of things that we're worried about and trying to figure out how we can communicate with the public on. And also the big upturn in amount of material received is very interesting. So
Mr. Chairman, it seems to be directly related to the number of Amazon boxes people are getting. So we've moved to an Amazon culture, and a lot of them are Amazon boxes. I would say the majority. So in addition to move in, move out, which is what we used to see people bringing in, now it's just stacks of boxes shipped to people's homes.
Thank you so much. That completes the business that we had on the agenda for this evening. As mentioned, well, let's see, the next meeting is October 23rd. I think, I'm trying to think at this particular point. I was mentioning before the meeting, I actually have to be out of town that week for a regional conference, and so that'll leave 4 of you here. If you have some issues as far as being able to make it to the meeting, please make sure you get that to staff and Scott, or so that if there's a problem with quorum, that you can be warned early so that people aren't wasting their time.
And we just determined that we only need 3 of us for a quorum
That's
currently.
correct. And I guess, having said that, obviously, the one thing I know of that will roll to the next meeting would be the MIAC recycling signage. And I'm wondering, do we need to go ahead and have our draft for the annual report brought before us at the next meeting in case there's issues with November and Thanksgiving or December and Christmas?
Mr. Chair, that'd probably be a good idea, just to be safe.
Having mentioned those 2 items, are there additional items that anyone has that they know of right now that we need to make sure we get on the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest maybe we bring back composting, residential composting, with proposed pricing around it for consideration from SWAC.
Dave?
I think we've talked about it a lot, but I think you guys are waiting on us, if that's correct. Is that correct? Is that- oh.
I just had a different question.
Oh,
Okay, so if it's not in relationship, I think that would, I think what we're, one of the things that's important to us is what came back in the survey.
right. Okay.
And I obviously have, I don't know, I guess maybe you've looked at the survey results. I'm not sure, do we forward the survey results to all commissioners? You did get that.
Yes, we did, Mr. Chair.
So I saw a slight, there's a little bit of flexibility in rates for recycling and for trash collection, but not a great deal. Apparently, the public is probably looking at, cents to maybe dollar type ranges and stuff like that. So yes, I'm not sure if we'd be in a position to go ahead and receive the pro forma for being able to go ahead and do recycling immediately. Certainly could be presented. But I would definitely look at those 2 survey questions on how people review their rates as I was thinking about what I might be trying to propose. Dave?
So, Mr. Commissioner and Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that raises a question I had about the survey as a topic. Understanding that you all might attend the council meeting on the 22nd is what we're tentatively planning. Did you want a report out of the executive summary of the survey once we have that discussion? We can do that the following day, whatever day the agenda meeting is. And I did, if it's appropriate, I had a follow-up to the question around composting is in the survey. And there's a general question around how important are these issues related to trash and recycling. And I think there's some inference to be made and there's some discussion to be had if you consider that 70% of the folks either find reducing the amount of waste that goes to the landfill either essential or very important. And there's also about 57% of the people say that it's essential or very important to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas that's produced. We did ask about implementing composting, and that percentage that find it very important or essential drops to 42%. So it's not a majority on the composting directly. However, I think there's policy discussion to be had around whether or not how you reduce what goes to the landfill and how you reduce greenhouse gas emissions typically in solid waste is through diversion types of programs, one of which might be composting. So whether or not you want an executive summary as an agenda item for the survey, knowing that you may or may not attend it the night prior, is that something you want to see and have that conversation?
Members of the commission? I'm imagining you probably do want to go ahead and have the information put before us.
I think that would be advisable, so everybody's on the same page as we start a discussion.
Okay,
So yes, please.
we'll add that down. Okay.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, would you like us to wait then on bringing, I think that was pre-survey. We were asked to wrap pricing around the processing, combine the processing and the hauling together and bring it back for possible like spring of 2021 implementation or 2020 implementation. But we can, if that's not a target, like maybe May or June of next year, then we can, there's no urgency to bringing it forward. We can wait for the executive summary and more information.
I would put that forward on the fact that we're going to be becoming much more aware of the public's view on recycling, and also that I myself may not be present at that meeting, just as items to consider on whether you want to try to go ahead and submit that for consideration next month, or if you want to go ahead and wait a month or two until all that information is digested by the commission.
We're happy to do either, Mr. Chairman, so.
With that, as the commission also,
Can present pricing, but it may be premature.
any of the commissioners have some thoughts about how much information should be processed, how fast, certainly it would be appropriate at this particular point if you want to go ahead and request that some of this stuff be staged. Those comments would be in order.
I would prefer staged. You know,
Better to know.
So I would say that from what I'm hearing at this point, probably next month's a little early for the proposal, but soon after would be good.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you addressed it or at a previous meeting, but it might be the appropriate time to start thinking about your next two meetings after October, or you want to wait till October. You're not going to be here at the next meeting. The November meeting is the day before Thanksgiving, and the December meeting is on Christmas. And I know sometimes you skip the December one and reschedule the November one to a different date. So you might want to get that on calendars, or at least think about when you want to do those.
And I would add to that that the critical point would be if the annual report were approved at the October meeting, then that would pretty much take care of our, well, I should say, obviously we have this other issue of, whether further conversations on composting could wait until January. Those kind of thoughts are in mind. If the commission were wanting to go ahead and adjust the timing of the meeting and meet a week early in November and/or a week early in December, that's been a frequent thing for what this commission has done. That doesn't need to be decided until the October meeting, but motions are always in order. Given that, I would suggest think about it, be prepared in October, and if you need to go ahead and call for an additional meeting and would prefer for it to be a little bit early in October and/or I'm sorry, earlier in November and/or December, we can go ahead and get that set. So,
Is the goal just to have a line item on the agenda for next month that penciled in now for that discussion?
I think that's appropriate, that, yeah. And without further comments, then I will go ahead and identify that our work is concluded and go ahead and call the meeting adjourned at 4:55.